Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another great episode of Beyond Trauma. I'm so glad you are here. We're entering into a new year now, and folks are in a great place to make long lasting change. And sometimes we just need a little extra support, right? To not make those same mistakes again and again of saying this is the time that we're going to change and then kind of falling off of it. So, today, this guest really offers some tools, some insights about long-lasting change, not the quick fixes, but how to look at ourselves, how to make improvements, make changes, also while loving ourselves, also while having a lot of compassion for ourselves. She's a wealth of knowledge, science-backed wisdom and spirituality, really combines it all into a beautiful package with tons and tons of takeaways. So I know you're going to love this episode. Before we jump in, just make sure you're taking a look at the offerings at laraland.us. I know I have some things coming up and a trauma-informed yoga teacher training through 3.5 Acres Yoga. Lots of great giveaways from you for you on those sites. And always excited to meet with you in spaces online and in person, especially in this new year. But yes, back to our guest, Samantha Harte. She is Dr. Samantha Harte is a physical therapist, an author, a performing artist, a podcast host, and a sober mom of two. She's been featured on ABC7 and CBS, written up in People Magazine, Time Magazine, Best Life, and the New York Post for her expertise on the intersection of mind, body, health, and wellness. Her self-help memoir, Breaking the Circuit: How to Rewire Your Mind for Hope, Resilience, and Joy in the Face of Trauma, is a reinvention of the 12 steps of recovery so that anyone, addict or not, can turn heartbeat into hope. It's a great book, and she's a tremendous guest. You may want to look back at when I had Nikki Myers on, who also talks about 12 steps and yoga for recovery. And we also talk about self-compassion and in this episode. And I know a few weeks back we had an episode that goes more deeply into self-compassion. So this really ties into the work that we've been doing together as a community on this podcast. I hope you see it that way. And as usual, please write us a review, put us a message on Instagram. Let us know your takeaways from the episode. That always feels really good. So here we go. Samantha, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here and making time at the beginning of this new year.
Oh, you're so welcome. This is a great way to start 2025.
Yes. Yeah, I'm launching into this one, and I think this will probably air in February, but I think that's really good timing. Because a lot of what I get from you and from reading your book is about lasting change and not that quick change. Am I right?
Oh boy, yes you are.
Not quick fixes. And I think that's probably a lot of what we'll talk about today. And so if the people are listening to this and it's February or March, that's the time when maybe some of those quick changes that they hope to make in January are starting to become questionable.
Exactly. Yeah, perfect timing. And that is, I think, a through line in my ethos and how I live today, but also to the listener who's already turned off by what we're saying. It's because I've tried every single version of
Mm,
Codex
mm,
until it failed. So I get it. I get
yes.
it.
Yeah. So
Yes.
maybe we can talk about your story a little bit. And you had some generational trauma, and I think that's important to point out to our listeners. And you had a pretty extreme case or clear case where you could see like this led to this when you were able to look at it. Some people have more subtle things coming from their parents that get passed down to them, but maybe you could share a little bit about generational trauma and how the patterns of our parents can become our patterns
Mm.
if we aren't careful. Or
Ye-
maybe even if we are, maybe it's just how it goes and it's our journey.
Yeah, I mean, the insights I have now are really because pain in reliving them, playing the patterns out unconsciously again and again has brought me to my knees such that I've had to find a new way forward.
Yeah.
And in finding a new way forward where I could have some success between deep spiritual work and therapy over decades, I now understand how deep the roots go in the trauma that's been passed down, right? But these are things I didn't know, couldn't see for
Yeah.
decades. And that's a really tricky part about change. Until we become conscious, and often it's through pain, pain is the circuit breaker, it wakes us up into a way we've been behaving that isn't working anymore. We might play these patterns out for our entire lives.
Yeah.
So, in some ways, pain is the absolute worst and hardest when it first shows up. And in other ways, it's the greatest blessing because it is inviting us to change and break these cycles of dysfunction. So, one example that comes to mind when you ask me that is my mother growing up was, we were in a matriarchal home. So what she said mattered the absolute most. And she overshared in a way that at the time made me feel so close to her, but in hindsight was very inappropriate for a young child. And one of the things she would constantly tell me is how poorly her mother treated her. Her mother used to call her fat. Her mother was really angry that she was born, very jealous of her, had, I'm sure, untreated mental illness. And by the time my mom became a mom, she swore she wouldn't be anything like that. And in many ways, she wasn't. She was an affectionate, loving mother. She was a great listener, but she would be obsessed with her looks. She would let us know without saying a whole lot whether she sort of approved of the thinness of our bodies. She would pick at food all day long like a bird and then be disgusted with somebody who was overweight, such that when we would walk by a person overweight, she would out loud go, ugh,
Mm.
in front of us, which made me cringe. And when she would talk about food, she would say things like, you can eat whatever you want. You just need to do it in moderation. It was kind of like those heavy people have lost control. So
Mm.
the real flex is to be hyper controlled over the food and then watch how I take a bite of this muffin and this piece of bread and ha 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 world. And yet she consumed almost no calories all day, which confused me so much. In hindsight, how I understand those things are, okay, your mother called you fat. Clearly you internalize that. She had no siblings. She never went to therapy. She had no support through that time, right? And so she essentially picked up an eating disorder called anorexia that she had no sense was even a part of her life, that I was witnessing, but I didn't know what it was, right? And so then shoot me out into young adulthood, and I'm absolutely obsessed with my physical appearance. I'm absolutely obsessed with fitness. I think now about the ways in which I, over the years, have exercised doing things that I absolutely hate to do
Mm.
because I really thought it would get me thin or keep me thin. This is how trauma is passed down, right? This
Yeah.
is one example. And oh my God, what it has taken me to unpack this stuff and to again be in so much pain around a pattern I'm in to go, I can't do this anymore. And then what is the way forward? What is the difference between my story and my mother's? And if I get to have my own story and my own relationship with food and body, and I really want it to feel good and last, what does that look and feel like? What types of education do I need? What types of abstinence do I need to practice? I mean, that's just the beauty and body standard. And that's just a tiny, tiny example,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, one thing that I felt was really powerful in what you said, there was a lot in there that was, but one thing I think is super interesting is that a lot of folks might not realize is people tend to repeat cycles of trauma as they're trying to sometimes escape what their parent did. So like your mom, she wanted to be different, and in trying to be different from her mom, she actually perpetuated the cycle. So we kind of do it in our trying to escape. We actually replicate past trauma.
Yeah, it's kind of fascinating. But I think that which never gets healed repeats.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think when we run away from something in such a strong way that we try to be like the opposite of it, it's another way of like controlling. Like, and what I love about your writing and your teachings is there's a lot about letting go of the controlling.
Mm. I think I used to, when I would speak in recovery rooms, I'm 15 years sober. Actually, next month I'll be 16 years sober. It's crazy. I used to always say my actual drug of choice is control. And what's fascinating is, in some ways, that's still very true. But I would argue, with the amount of soul work I've done, that the very first thing I became addicted to, if you will, a pattern that was deeply ingrained, that still plays out in my adult life today, that is harmful, though it helped me as a young girl, is self abandonment. I'm going to self abandon and become the fixer of you, whoever you are, because then you will love me and I will be worthy. So, is that a form of control? Yeah, sure. It's controlling people, places, and things, outcomes, something external to me so that I can feel better internally.
Yeah.
Right. But yeah, I think again and again and again, with these things in life, that there's no clear pathway to get through. I always talk about my perfectionism and how it had such a noose around my neck, deep into sobriety, by the way. And it almost killed me. I mean, spiritually, I was dead trying to perfect the world around me, despite being physically abstinent. And I'm very lucky that I didn't relapse and die in those 5 years that I was running on that, just
Mm.
running on my ability to control the world around me. Because a lot of addicts would have found that so intolerable and they would have potentially relapsed. And we don't know if we drink or use again, especially nowadays with how laced everything is, that whether that would be our last go around. And I think the thing that stopped me from relapsing is that my first sponsor, who saved my life, ended up relapsing and dying, killing
Mm.
himself. And that scared me so much that I didn't do that, but I held on to control at all costs until a marital crisis took me to my knees. And that was the circuit breaker where I said, I don't want to die, but I cannot go on living like this. And that was the beginning of one layer of surrender, of what does it mean now to surrender to this marriage not looking at all like what I thought it would, and potentially not working out at all, and me being 30 something, single again, desperately wanting a family and babies, and this man who I thought I was going to spend my life with is just gone. Like what is that letting go look like? And doing the steps on the marital crisis, and again, whatever has happened in my life, no amount of spiritual work prior has fully prepared me for the next layer of surrender and letting go that would be required of me.
Yeah.
It prepped me in a sense where I knew I would be able to get through it, or I had a little bit of faith, a little stack of evidence that I survived my hardest things up to date. But still, a massive leap of faith has been required. And every time I thought, oh, this is what letting go of control looks like and feels like, this is the work required, to get to the other side of this mess and feel joy again. Inevitably, when the next thing shows up, I try to double down on control, usually for a lot less time.
Mhm.
And then there's a new level of surrender. There's just, we don't graduate from our spiritual curriculum.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that was a big lesson when I finally realized there's no end here. There's no end to this thing. That was a big surrender moment for me. It's like trying to get somewhere. Nope. It's just we're kind of it's kind of like a cycle, and a
Yeah,
spiral, I think. But yes, like the recovery times, like they're shorter. We catch ourselves more quickly. So I think it's not that we're not continuing to grow, right?
exactly. I look at it like, I think in the land of quick fixes, to circle back to the beginning of this conversation, we would love to look at the trajectory of our lives and just see it go up
Yeah.
on a slant, like a beautiful straight slanted line. And yet anything, the doctor of physical therapy in me would have to tell patients this all the time. The life coach has to tell people this all the time. What we're talking about right now is that it is a line that is diagonal and that does end up going up, but it's very bumpy, like the stock market. It goes up and then it drops and it goes up, down, up, down, up, down, up, drop, up, down, up, down, up, down, right? So that when you continue to be on a path of healing and growing and personal transformation, at the end of it all, you've gone way up from where you started.
Yeah.
But holy shit, buckle your seatbelt. It's
Yeah.
going to be a bumpy ride.
Yeah. I love that because I think, knowing that, it sets a different expectation than thinking like if I just do these things, like life's going to be perfect, and that controlling mentality again. And then when you're in that and something little even goes wrong, you're defeated, you're destroyed, as opposed to like expecting, yeah, there are going to be some downs.
Yeah. And also, I think you can't go all the way wrong if the main purpose of your spiritual work is to continue to learn how to go inward and trust yourself
Mm.
that you'll get through it. Trust your own internal resources. Then it doesn't matter what any external situation arises. If you are waiting for this or that to happen for you to be okay, you will always be in danger of everything falling apart when it isn't. If you are working such that you are building a deep well of trust with the highest part of yourself, nobody can take that from you. That's what healing is.
Yeah. That was a deep, deep gem that you you dropped right there. And that's really what it comes down to. Yeah. So technically, what would you suggest? Maybe we can look at it's at surrender, at and it ties in also. I think, you talk about like you can't willpower your way through some of this stuff. For people that are used to, and I think a lot of my listeners are in that bucket, they are spiritual people, but they are also like that self-help type, right? And sometimes that can get into this, like, I can control it all by doing all the things, I do my meditation, I drink my green juice, I manage everything, and there's that perfectionist overdoing side of it. What could you offer, like, actually, what would one do to lean more into the surrendering, the trusting,
Mhm.
that side of things?
Yeah, I mean, this is my whole life story. So if you are an identified perfectionist, or as I identify, a recovering perfectionist, like, I'm speaking directly to you when I say what I'm about to say. I'm just going to go straight into the greatest pain of my whole life. And before I say what I'm about to say, here's the funny thing about perfectionism. We are taught in this culture, if you do this, then you will get that. We are taught to be good little soldiers, to follow the norm, get the degree, buy the house, marry the guy or the girl, have the kids or not, right? And then you will be happy. And then. So we are literally brainwashed from the gate, not to mention whatever survival mode we've had to go in from traumas we've experienced, what we've learned in our formative years, in our house. But perfectionism collapses in matters of the heart, period. And nobody can argue that. If you have ever been betrayed by a friend, if you have ever been broken up with and it wasn't your decision, if you have ever been fired from a job, tell me the clear pathway forward. If you do this, then you will have that. There is none. There is no such thing. So, with everything that really matters, like love and community and connection, it doesn't work. So, what are we going to do? What are us perfectionists going to do? In my marital crisis, I did the 12 steps. I had done them plenty of times in recovery. I never really built any kind of faith other than what was external to me. And since that collapsed, my idea of faith had to expand. And this woman came into my life and said, what if we do the steps on your marriage? So let's change the language. I'm powerless over my marriage, my husband, that I cheated on him on the front end of my addiction, and we didn't really heal that. And now we're married and there's repercussions, whether or not he's cheating on me, because boy, it seems like he is, whether or not we're going to see this thing through and end up together, on and on. And when I try to exert power over this man that I cannot control, my life becomes unmanageable in the following ways. Where's the scroll, right? I mean, I had no access to peace or power. I was utterly focused on him, begging him to forgive me, begging him to go to therapy, begging him to go to Al-Anon. So we went through the steps and we got to the 9th step, which is making an amends. I had made tons of amends in recovery. I was 5 years sober. This woman said, have you ever made an amends to yourself?
Wow.
If you are a perfectionist, you are run by your inner critic. You are run by a voice that says, try harder, go faster, do better. Never enough. It's a never enoughness.
Yeah.
It is a hole that will never be filled by anything external, no matter how desperately we try. And the idea that I could consider forgiving myself for being the cheater on the front end of the marriage and whatever repercussions were now showing up, that perhaps the marriage I was in was not the one I deserved, that perhaps the punishment did not fit the crime. And if that was true and I deserved a big, beautiful marriage, what would that mean about the way I was treating the situation in real time? What would that mean about the way I'm talking to myself? Because if every time I tried to make sense of the situation or thought of a new clever thing I could say to my husband, I instead went, this isn't what you want. And in fact, this isn't what you deserve. And so instead of the critic saying, this is what you get for what you did, I had to interrupt her and say, but what if it's not what I get? What if I get to have something else? What does that even look like? What does that even feel like? So there has to be a consciousness to the way we're speaking to ourselves, and a very frequent and mindful interruption of the critic. Because if we want to be people who are loving ourselves through our pain, which we do, we don't want to, you can't hate yourself into change, then we have to practice speaking to ourselves in a more loving way. We have to. So I had to start going, well, what would somebody who actually forgives themselves and believes she deserves a better life than this say? What would she say to herself? And then I would have to practice saying it. Now, here's the thing. So I'm telling the listeners, right? You'd have to actively get into a practice of paying attention to your critical voice, your controlling voice, whatever you want to call it. I tell my son it's called his perfect voice and that I have one too. And it's just a part of who he is. It's not all of who he is. Okay. Whatever you want to call it, give it a name, identify it as a part of you, but it is not all of you. And it's definitely not the highest part of you. Become aware every time it shows up, get curious about it, interrogate it. And if your identity wants to shift to somebody who's more loving toward themselves, more compassionate, more forgiving, then come up with a new thing to say to yourself right in that moment and then practice saying it again and again. Now, as I started to do this work, the absolute miracle, which has saved my life 1,000 times since then, from slipping back into the stranglehold of control, is that I could hear my intuitive voice, which I hadn't heard in decades. If you're running off of perfectionism, that is not your intuitive voice. Your intuitive voice, here's the difference. I always say it's the four C's. When my intuition showed up, when people are like, how do you know? How do you know it's your intuition versus your fear or your control or your anger? It's clear, right? When we're in control mode, it's busy brain, obsessive, ruminating, ideas just bouncing back and forth because we got to figure it out, right? It's not that at all. It's clear. It just shows up, just floats up. The answer just a suggestion, an idea, an answer, a direction, a course correction shows up. It's clear, it's calm, it's curious, and it's compassionate. I knew when that voice showed up and would make suggestions. And by the way, it wasn't always suggestions about how to say something kind to myself or about my marriage. Sometimes it was just, hey, there are all these patients in your clinic, when I worked for someone else, who are getting discharged and they're not all the way better. You went to grad school for a really long time to make people all the way better. Where are they going? You should ask them where they're going to get 100% better. Because if it's not with a highly qualified practitioner, you should tell them they should come to you. She would say things like that to me. And then I would act on it. So I would go, that's an interesting idea, right? You have to then act on the new thing, the new part of yourself. Otherwise, you won't see wins in the new direction that your intuitive voice is nudging you if you only ever take action on the perfection. and the
When
control.
you said you didn't hear your intuitive voice for like decades,
Mhm.
um, and for folks who are wanting to tap more into hearing that voice, are
Yep.
there things we can do to make more space for that voice to come up more?
Yeah. And everyone can eye roll as much as they want. Meditation is crucial. Stillness is crucial. Why? Let's talk about the science of that for a second. Being in control mode is being hypervigilant, hypervigilant.
Yeah.
And in the nervous system, that is a sympathetic state, fight or flight. We are more dysregulated. If you do not have practices to slow down, that could literally be on your lunch break at work, making a commitment to stand outside and let the sun hit your face for 5 minutes. That's it. Could be that. If you do not carve out time in the day for stillness, you cannot get your body into a parasympathetic state. So you can start regulating and start to hear the whisper of your intuition. Start to look for the parts of you that are more calm, more clear, more curious, and more compassionate. Right? So I don't always have time. In fact, I almost never formally meditate. I have two little kids. I'm not starting my morning with a 20-minute meditation. I mean, I would love that because I know the benefits of it now, but that's not realistic for me. Sometimes my meditation is a drive from A to B where I don't put the music on. I don't talk on the phone. I don't even listen to a podcast, though I love that too, but that's not meditation. That's growth. That's different.
Yeah.
And I just sit in the car quietly and I notice what's coming up for me. That's it. But the thing is, this has to be said. You cannot hear your intuition if you have untreated shame. I'm going to say that again. You cannot hear your intuition if you have untreated shame. Because that voice will overpower any intuitive whisper. It's too loud. It's too strong. It is too corrosive,
Mm.
which is why, for a lot of people who are stuck in a pattern of self ridicule and self sabotage and self loathing, must begin a practice of compassionate self talk and arrest that first. Arrest the inner critic first before they're going to, in stillness, hear their intuition. So that is the asterisk among all asterisks that I have to say. Because someone listening who goes, okay, today I'm going to go spend 5 or 10 minutes in the sun, and the only thing they hear is you're a piece of shit,
Yeah.
do better, try harder, be
Mm.
thinner, they're going to go, well, that didn't work.
Yeah.
No shit. That is not going to work. And I am speaking from my own experience, but I will tell you, writing this book, watching people I love die in recovery from addiction, looking at the research that is now pretty darn extensive from people like Brene Brown on shame and vulnerability, reading the spiritual literature about energy, frequency, vibration, and that shame is literally one of the darkest, lowest levels energetically that we can operate from that blocks every single blessing. I am convinced that shame is the number one killer of our spirit. And if we are not careful, and you're someone like me who has addiction issues, it could actually be the killer of your life.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And we had someone on a few weeks ago to talk about how to start working with self compassion, and especially for folks who have been through trauma, it can bring up a lot, and um, that self acceptance and self love, it takes time. It's one of the hardest things, but it is the the crucial step. And I like how you're putting that it really comes before you can get to those next steps of listening to an inner voice.
Yep.
Yeah, that really helps clarify.
And I think too, we're so conditioned by what's happened to us. By the time we're 20, 30, 40, there's been decades of shaming
Yeah.
internally and externally.
Yeah.
There's so many belief systems that have to be shattered. And just to make a start, you have to, when you know you're going to have to walk straight into a good luck being compassionate, who am I going to be without that edge, without that push? You are shattering an old identity in exchange for creating a brand new one. So you have to believe that life is going to be even 1% better with this new identity.
Mm,
If you don't believe that it's better, you're not going to change. You're not. And maybe that means you're not done and that those patterns are still serving you, which is very, very real, right?
yeah.
I mean, we've
Yeah.
heard these things before that you have to be so sick of the way you're living, so done with those feedback loops
Yeah.
and that same circuitry and where it always ends up,
Yeah.
that the fear of changing is less than the fear of staying the same. Period.
Yeah.
Even if you can't see or know or feel how it's going to get better.
Yeah. And I always encourage people to maybe take some time to like feel into the pain, how and really look at how that pattern that was serving you, because it's there because it did something before that was helpful, and really feel into, write about, feel how it's not serving. Because sometimes, like, rather than like the let yourself get to rock bottom or let yourself get to such a pain point that you're forced to change, you can instead just feel it, because you're probably running away from or not acknowledging how that pattern is no longer serving. So you don't necessarily have to like get to, let it keep going until you're there, but you can almost like bring it on by actually stopping to feel what it's doing to you.
Yeah,
That makes sense.
it does. It does. And also doing it with someone you feel safe doing it with.
Yeah.
So important,
Yeah.
because there's a very real reason why people don't feel it. I mean, especially when we're talking about capital T trauma. I mean, the idea of reliving that is unimaginable. It really is.
Yeah.
So, doing again, what can we control, right? We can do some research on who is a trusted advisor in this case that I would feel safe enough to tap back into that pain point such that my body went, we've got to move through this so it doesn't get any worse than this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And definitely the stability, first has to be there. And if someone is still going through a traumatic event or events, that's not the time to let your defenses and protective patterns go. We always want to make sure folks are first safe and have, are really grounded in some safety and good supports. Because maybe those patterns aren't protecting you, and you need them right now, and I think only the individual can say when it's time.
Yeah.
So you also talk about in your book, and as you go through in your book, the 12 steps and how you reimagine them, this point where you bring in humility. So there's this time in that process of change where you start to maybe feel good, and maybe a little bit too confident that like you've got this, like we were talking about before, like you know kind of, I'm on that upward trajectory, life's never gonna get me down again. And I find that can be a dangerous spot. And
Mm.
um I like how you bring in humility, you bring in like doing kind of maintenance. And maybe you can speak to some of that work for folks who are on that side of things or on that part of the cycle.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting, right? Because we don't, on the one hand, want a level of ego inflation or spiritual bypass to start taking place where we think we don't have more work to do. And on the other hand, we don't want to constantly be vigilant about, oh, don't get too comfortable. Something's going to happen, which again, Brene Brown calls foreboding joy, right?
Mm.
Waiting for the shoe to drop. So if we don't want to be one or the other, then what does that mean? And something that comes to mind when you ask me that is, in a way, since every day all we have is that day. That's the God's honest truth. Nobody knows. Really all we have is the moment that we're in, right? So we're only as good any day and any moment as how spiritually fit we are. That's true. I mean, and when you think about the body, you can eat well for a time, you can exercise for a time, and then if you stop, you lose those gains. Spiritual fitness is no different. So, part of the step work does bake in, and again, I've sort of made these things change over the years as I've changed and grown and made them more robust. And part of it are these daily practices that help keep me accountable for the way I'm living my life, for how spiritually fit or not I am at any given moment. And there are plenty of times in my recovery that I haven't physically relapsed, but I've been in a massive behavioral slip, and I end up hurting myself and people I love. And I can certainly say that those have been times where the feelings that have been coming up are so painful, like when I lost my dad, that I was for a time okay not being as spiritually fit because I could not even imagine feeling the depth of sorrow that the grief was asking me to feel. So I found ways to run from it. Wasn't the best use of my time, right? And in hindsight, I was absolutely further away from my faith, from my intuition. I was doubling down on controlling food and body in particular at that time. Uh, so now, would it serve me to beat myself up over those choices? Oh, hell no. The work I've done to overcome that, I couldn't, right? And so it's really this gentle straddling of mindfulness every day as best you can. And when you slide back into an old pattern or behavior, noticing it quickly, not lamenting over it, definitely not going into guilt or shame about it, and just going, how can I do better? And so one of the things I do every night, I've been doing it for a long, long time, and the list used to just be a gratitude list with a sober friend at the end of the night. It has become a lot more than that. And so today, what it looks like is at the end of every day, we email each other a few things that went well that day, a few things that could have gone better. And now we are not talking about external. I mean, you can say, oh, what could have gone better? Well, I wish it wouldn't have been raining all day, or I wish that person wouldn't have. That's not very helpful, though, right? Like, what went well in your day that you participated in? Were you kind to somebody? Did you do the things you said you were going to do? Did you stick to the commitments you made with yourself? Things like that. What could have gone better? Oh, well, you were pretty impatient with your kids, in the middle of the day yesterday. You could have right? So that's the kind of stuff that was on my list last night. I literally woke up with my period this morning, and I was thinking yesterday when I was super irritable, like, oh my God, what is wrong with me? But I like felt like I couldn't stop it, you know? And so I was very
Yes.
impatient with my kids. Not a proud moment, but in that moment where I'm writing what could have gone better, I'm looking at my behavior and going, okay, I needed the power of the pause yesterday, and
Yeah.
I wasn't using it very much. So without beating myself up about what happened, I'm going to take that into the next day with me
Yeah.
and do something about it, right? Take action on what I now see that I can change.
Yeah.
And then we write a few ways that we lived in alignment with our ideal self. Very important, because when you're building a new identity, you want to behave in a way that casts a vote towards the person you want to become.
Yes.
So I get to see that and pat myself on the back for that. Very important for someone overcoming perfectionism. Holy
Yeah.
shit, you did it, girl. You did it. But even though some things didn't go well, like a bunch of things did. A bunch of things did. Then I write some blessings, which is really, some things I'm grateful for. Could be super simple. My sobriety, a a sunny day. It doesn't matter. Good night's sleep. And then I write my intentions for tomorrow. So then I'm going into the next day thinking, okay, I want to. And intention isn't just, the work stuff. All right, I got to get this and this. No, what are some personal intentions? What are some physical fitness intentions? What are some spiritual intentions you have? Right. And so, and if you really want to rock out, plug those intentions into your calendar, including what you're doing for yourself and your spirit, the same way you would plug in a doctor's appointment.
Mm. Yeah.
Right? So I don't know if that answers the question. It's a long answer, but there's so much we can do.
No, I love that. Actually, I wonder if you would just go through that, maybe like the bullet points again one more time for us. So it's what went well today, and that means like what what I did well, like that I participated in, not an internal, what I could have done better.
Mhm.
And again, not necessarily like something that went wrong on the outside, but where I could have taken that pause.
Without
Well,
blame or shame. That is
yes.
critical, without blame or shame.
Yeah, just noticing.
Yep.
Noticing. And what's the next one?
The next one is ways I lived in alignment with my
Love that.
ideal self.
Love that. Yeah.
That's the third one. The fourth one is blessings. And the fifth one is intentions for tomorrow.
And how long would you say that process takes of going through those?
Less than 5 minutes. I mean,
Less than 5
I
minutes.
mean, yes. And five sounds like a really long time. Probably less than two.
I mean, that I think is something very doable,
Yeah.
right? It's something very doable that and I bet the payoff for the 2 to 5 minutes is so immense. You would never give that up.
Never. I mean, literally 10 years.
Yeah.
10 years strong doing that. Yeah.
Yeah. I really feel like it doesn't take much. You were talking about like a vote for that self, that you're becoming, and like it doesn't take much. I know you talk about like different ways of thinking about God or spirituality or like something our highest self in the book, and I think about the universe and being in alignment with that energy, and I always think like I just if I give that one step forward, like into that's like that says I'm here for it, the amount that I get back in return is
Mhm.
so huge.
Hmm.
It doesn't take much.
It doesn't. And, you know, it's very tricky because the more advanced uh, technology becomes, the more instant gratification is dangled in our faces. And the road of a spiritual warrior is the slow and steady road. And there will always be a trade off. So, anything, you can do anything you want instantly. You could do a crash diet and lose weight quickly, right? Pick anything and you can get a quick, relatively easy outcome. But in the long run, it almost never works, right? So if you crash diet, you haven't really changed the habits that made you put on the weight in the first place, right? So you're going to gain it back. You're going to gain the weight back. So there's a trade off. You can always choose the quicker, easier route. You can. But know that the reverse is true as well. If you delay instant gratification and you do these tiny little things we're talking about, there is compound interest. So you stack up the hours and the days and the weeks and the months and the years, and all of a sudden, your life is beyond your wildest dreams. So you don't get the thing you really wanted right away. And it can feel like torture because we know now that emotional pain actually hurts the body the same as physical pain does. I mean, it is hard as hell to do the kind of work we are talking about. There is no sugarcoating. I will testify to that. But oh my God, the gains over time. So choose your hard.
Yeah.
Both hard. So choose your hard.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for that, Samantha. It's so powerful. It's what I believe in. It goes again, it really circles us back to how we started this conversation about, you can do the same with dieting that you can do with like a quick fix in your life, a quick, you know, oh, I'm going to now be positive all the time and without looking at the darker things. Right. And yeah, you might get 2 weeks out of that. And then everything starts up again, or you can take the time to be with some of the different emotions and make the smaller, longer lasting changes. And I like how you put it about the compounding. I've definitely seen that in my own life, and it's what I try to encourage for people. So some beautiful lessons there.
Thank
Is
you.
there anything like I didn't ask you or we didn't talk about that you hope to bring into this conversation?
Yeah, I love that you asked me that. Yeah, I coach people now spiritually, all right? I have this degree in physical therapy and for many, many years it was deeply fulfilling, particularly when I started my own practice, when I listened to that intuitive voice that said you should fill the gap between people being 60% better and 100% better. I started a cash-based practice and it was wonderful to be able to earn a real living as a physical therapist and really help people, really get to the source. And at the same time, I was accumulating all this time sober, going through all these hard things. And I couldn't help but notice what I call the soul sickness in the patient. And that's not why they were coming to me. They didn't want me to fix their spirit,
Mm,
they wanted me to fix their knee pain. But I've always been intrigued by the spiritual side of wellness. And then my sister died 2.5 years ago to a drug overdose. And Samantha Harte, the physical therapist, died too. Because there was no way that moving forward in my life, in my work in the world, that I was not going to treat the spiritual side of wellness. So I wrote this book. The book is out. I went into a grief cave for 2 years. I started singing again and dancing again. And I wrote a screenplay. I mean, my life today looks so different than what it did. And yet, I'm still a healer. I'm just a more robust version of myself than I was before, with a lot more to offer. And my book is my calling card for how I treat the spiritual side of wellness, right? I am taking those 12 steps that once were repurposed in my life and saved me, I can now use to help save somebody else's. So what I've created is what I call the strong heart method. My business is Strong Heart Fitness. I've always loved that name because even when I started it as just a PT, it was about, yes, a literal strong heart. When you exercise,
Mhm.
heart will get stronger. But really, what I was trying to say was spiritually, you know, we want to be fit in our heart. We want to be resilient, come what may. And now when I coach people, they get all the things with the body that I've been doing for years, which is really just a rewiring of the nervous system, of the brain body connection, and how you fire up muscles that you haven't used, how you downregulate muscles that are working too hard, right? Retraining people's movement patterns so that they can not just get back to what they love to do, but actually prevent injury going forward, right? Be a master of their body. But
Yeah.
I use the 12 steps as the rewiring process for the emotional realm, right? And when we talk about delayed gratification, anyone can eye roll at that because it's just like, ugh, like it just seems so dreadful, to sort of trudge through the mud for a long time before you see the result. But I don't want it to be lost on people that there is science behind that. That's just the way it works. It's been researched,
Yeah.
right? So there is a coaching container by which I take people through a full blown rewiring process in the brain body connection that changes not just the habits of their actual body, but of their mind. So they can have a body and a life that they love. And it's it's amazing to me how long it's taken to be ready to serve again. But I am so ready. And after my book came out, most people think you write a book and you've sort of arrived, you did this thing, this huge thing that so many people want to do and they never do in their life. Really, it's just a beginning.
Yeah.
Now it's like, kick the doors open. Hello, world. This is who I am. This is what I offer. And I am interested in the people who are ready to do the work. Because if you are ready, your entire life is about to skyrocket into
Mhm.
another dimension. I
Yes.
really, really wanted to share that. It's like, yes, I'm an author, but I'm a coach. I'm a
Yeah.
healer. I
Yeah.
am here to shepherd people and to take all the lessons of all my hardest things and use it as a bridge between me and the person who's suffering to help them through.
Yeah. And you're a wonderful person to do it. How can people find you if they want to work with you?
You guys can go to my website, which is drsamanthahart.com, and literally book a free discovery call, or we'll just talk. And it's either a good fit or it isn't, but we'll still have a great conversation. And also Instagram, I'm very active on there. I'm active on a bunch of social media platforms, but Instagram is the most active. You can just send me a DM. People who hear me on podcasts do that all the time, and I love it. Who've read my book are messaging me. It's so special to me to hear back. Doesn't matter how far along I am on the journey. We all need to hear
Yeah.
that we're making a difference. So you can just send me a message on Instagram. It's the same handle, Dr. Samantha Hart, Harte.
Perfect. And the book is called Breaking the Circuit. And it's a wonderful book. And your offering is it's unique, it's powerful, it's based in science, and holds a real spiritual center. So you managed to put it all in there, and that's not easy to do or to explain all the time. So I really appreciate that you're so much more than a soundbite, Sam, and you've offered just a wealth, a generous wisdom today, and I really appreciate that about you.
Thank you so much. It's been an amazing conversation.
Thank you.